We're on a mission from God.
And now for something completely different.
Let's get ready to rumble! Yeah, baby, yeah!
This is Pastor Jolly John Lekumsky from St. Paul's Lutheran Church in New Athens, Illinois, and Trinity Lutheran Church in Darmstadt, Illinois. And at my right hand, I have
Pastor Matt Youngblood Clark from Ascension Lutheran Church in the tree light streets of South St. Louis.
That's right. The spirit of Christmas has started up, hasn't it?
Yes, the streets are lit up, the trees are lit, the festivals have begun. So we our neighborhood, St. Louis Hills, where we're located, transforms itself into Christmas town even. And that's what
we got to come over and see that. We've never come over and seen the
take
lights.
a look.
Is there a particular area that
they come by bus even.
Where do you go? What's the street?
So you want to check out Murdoch Avenue, which turns into Candy Cane Lane.
Okay.
And then we got Snowflake Street. That's another road that transforms itself. And a couple of them have different radio frequencies to tune into, and they have choreographed light displays.
Is that right?
That's timed with the music. It's pretty cool. It's worth seeing.
But you know what they don't have?
What?
You don't have no fishing Santa Claus over there, do you? Come on,
I'm guessing you do over there in New Athens.
Come down to New Athens for our spectacular light show with at least 1,000 different lights.
1,000 sprinkle lights.
And we have the fishing Santa, which you will not find anywhere else, I believe. Perhaps in the entire world. I have never seen
a fishing Santa.
But we have him here at New Athens. But that's okay. Go to Murdoch, see the things over in St. Louis, and then come over for our fabulous light display.
It is so crowded. I mean, it's crowded with cars, so we usually just walk the displays.
Oh, that's cool.
If the weather's decent, take a walk. Go by Ted Drew's.
Cool.
Enjoy your custard.
Is Ted Drew's open?
They are. Yeah, they are selling Christmas trees like crazy right now.
Do they sell? I don't want to buy a Christmas tree. I want to buy ice cream.
I know. You and me both.
But we can't get that anymore.
So, yes, they still have the ice cream. They still have the frozen custard. Okay. So you're safe. You're safe.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now we've planned your holiday weekend for you.
That's right. Come on over.
But actually, we don't want to start the holiday yet because this, technically speaking, is the last day of the church year. Because the church year actually does not officially begin. Well, maybe if you're Jewish, it would start tonight at sunset. but
for our Jewish listeners observing Advent.
For all you
Thanks,
Jewish
John.
people, because tomorrow will be the first Sunday in Advent.
Yes.
So technically this Saturday, we're still in the old church year. In fact, like I said, we're wrapping up the church year. So what the tradition is that when we come to the end of the church year, we like to talk about the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus Christ. And that's what Matt and I would like to do today.
Yeah, and there's also an emphasis, too, on Jesus as king at that return.
That's true.
Yeah, so sometimes even that last Sunday, sometimes called Christ the King Sunday, and some of the readings that we use, at least, reflect that kingship of Jesus, that he's not coming as this little baby again to suffer and die. No, he's coming as king over all things. He comes that second time.
And therein, I'm glad you alluded to that. That becomes the great contrast. So we end with this big emphasis that he's coming as the judge, he's coming as the king, he's coming in power and glory, surrounded by angels. And then all of a sudden, boom, we're back to this Jesus who comes as this little child lying in a manger. Yeah, it's kind of a nice contrast. And he's both. That's the great thing. He's both of those things. He's both king and he's also both humble babe lying in a manger.
Exactly. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's just incredible. And that's the amazing thing, too, is at his return, he's still human.
Yeah.
He's still man, God and man.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed. Wow, his great love for us.
So what we'd like to start with is we got several different texts that have to do with the events at the end of the world, and I would like to start with a challenging one, the so-called Abomination of Desolation, and then Matthew's got some stuff about when Jesus comes, and we're going to talk about where they separate us as sheep and goats.
Yeah, Matthew 25.
And if we have time, I would like to raise the issue, why does it, sometimes the Bible seems to say that the end will come suddenly and no one will know it's coming, a total surprise like a thief, and then other times, well, like the text we're going to look at right now, like, there's going to be all these signs that the end will come, and then he'll arrive. So, can we start talking about one of the signs that I think puzzles people? The abomination of desolation. It's in Matthew chapter 24.
Okay, let's take a look.
Chapter 24. Lots of end of the world stuff there. If you look for end of the world stuff, 24, 25 is a good place to go. Have you got it there? You want to read them at verse 15?
You bet. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is at the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now. No, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short.
All right, that's good enough. I think that gives us the material we need to look at. So what do you know about this abomination of desolation, which apparently is a symbol, a sign that the world is about to come to an end?
So it's hearkening back, as it says here, as Jesus says in Matthew, back to the Old Testament, back to the time of Daniel. Yeah. And this connection to the temple, this abomination taking place in the temple itself, that place where God dwells there in Jerusalem.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you because that's part of the controversy.
Yes.
We're going to share, because this is a very controversial subject. Because is it the temple or is it the entire city of Jerusalem? The holy place. He talks about the holy place, but there is some debate. But go ahead.
Well, I think part of it is pointing to an event in the temple, this intertestamental period. So in between the Old and New Testaments, how the temple is desecrated.
It is.
This pig sacrifice, even in the temple itself.
Maybe we know what the terms mean.
Yes.
Abomination is something that would be offensive, something that literally would disgust God.
Yeah.
And desolation is actually comes from the word wilderness. That's what it comes from. And so desolation is a place where people don't want to be. We talk about a desolate area, and it means, well, not many people are around there. So we got something that's going to offend God, and yet at the same time is going to offend people too. They're going to say, oh, I don't want to be any part of that. So so we got this whole deal that you're talking about. About 160 BC, I believe it was.
Yeah. The temple, just really is desecrated. But at the same time, as you alluded to, we think of the wider Jerusalem city itself, the city of Jerusalem itself. And I think when we're looking at this, and this is kind of an apocalyptic passage, I guess we could call it. And maybe that's one of the first things we need to recognize, too. Here in Matthew, as Jesus speaks, but also in Daniel. It is. Using that apocalyptic
literature.
Exactly. In the book of Revelation, we think of that, too. We think of parts of Ezekiel, where it's loaded with symbolism and with different pictures. And part of the challenge is then unpacking, okay, what does this mean? And sometimes it's pointing ahead to different events that will take place. Some are foreshadowing of an even greater event that may take place even later.
So that's a good way of pointing it out. So it's not necessarily just one thing, but it might be a series of things, each, of course, getting progressively more and more important, more and more widespread, more and more significant.
And so maybe a good, Lutheran, we kind of joke about this sometimes. The Lutheran answer is about Jerusalem, is about the temple, and we might just say, well, yes.
It's about it all.
It's about it all.
So you have this thing of Antiochus Epiphanes, because actually I did an intensive study on this whole abomination of desolation for my last sermon. And he's this Greek king who claims to be God. And like you said, he is obviously offended at Jews. Why would he be offended at Jews if he claims to be God?
Well, Jews consider him to be unclean, to be a Gentile, to be apart from the favor of God.
So he's not only not God, but he wouldn't even be liked by God in the way. And obviously he's not liked by God because he puts a statue of Zeus in the temple. He starts butchering pigs, sacrificing pigs in the temple.
And talking about abomination, this unclean animal, this pig being sacrificed.
So that's an abomination. It's idolatry, which is an abomination to God. As you said, it desecrates the temple, so it would be a thing of desolation. Of course, all of our Jewish listeners would be quick to remind us that it has a happy ending, right? With Judas Maccabeus, the great Jewish leader, and he defeats this Antiochus and cleanses up the temple. And in fact, this next month, from I believe it is December 12th to the 20th, Hanukkah. Which is the rededication of the temple. So, so all of our Jewish listeners out there, blessings on your celebration of the fact that the temple was at this point restored. Okay. Caligula, the Roman emperor, tried to do the same thing. He also claimed to be God. He wanted to set up a statue of himself in the temple. Didn't pull it off because Caligula died. Okay. Now, here's just this thought occurred to me, though, because we said, well, that proves he isn't God. But ironically, God does die, doesn't he, Matt?
Yeah, God himself. Yeah.
Only he rises on the dead.
Exactly, raises himself from the dead.
Yeah, Caligula couldn't pull that bit off. Lenski, you love Lenski, don't you? You love Lenski like I love Lenski. Lenski says he doesn't think the abomination has anything to do with foreign powers putting their idols in the temple. He thinks it's what the Jews did to themselves. Because in about, let me see, it was 67 AD, there was a group of very violent, militaristic Jews called Zealots who felt that Rome should be violently opposed. They had taken over the temple, and then there was another more conservative group of Jews who felt they should maintain their loyalty to Rome, and they fought a great battle in the temple and shed the blood of hundreds of men spread all over the temple floor. Again, an abomination, a desolation. So now would you like to finally hear... Oh, I'm sorry. Talking about Jerusalem. Some scholars point out that the abomination of desolation wasn't just the temple, but it was when the Romans surrounded Jerusalem to besiege it. And in fact, that's what Luke says. Luke, in his parallel account, talks about when you see the armies surrounding the city, it's time for you to flee. Eusebius, the Christian historian, says, in fact, that is what happened, that the Christians left and went to Pella. You can see I've been doing some research.
Boy, I'm impressed.
Okay. Just don't ask me anything other than the abomination of desolation. That's all I really know at this point. So anyway, would you like to hear my opinion, Matt, on what the abomination... Go ahead.
I'll just jump in real quick, too.
Yeah.
I think of just the worship in the temple apart from Christ is an abomination too. That even after Christ comes and even after the temple of his body is destroyed, right, and then raised again, to even still have sacrifices being made and putting trust and faith in those rather than in the Lamb of God who was just sacrificed on the cross, that's an abomination too.
And you know what, Matt? See, they say that great minds think alike. And you and I think alike as well.
I know.
So,
doesn't apply.
It probably applies to any number of levels of the mind. But because that's seriously, I'm excited because that's exactly the same thought I had. I think the whole business of Christ and being crucified by his own people, by the people of God, I think that's the abomination. And it isn't a desolation at first because God's a patient, merciful God. So he allows the temple to remain. The Christians actually go to temple, don't they? Mm-hmm. Not to make sacrifices,
that's where they gather. Yep.
As you pointed out. Don't need to do that, but to pray to God, to speak about Jesus Christ. But it's only then when the Jews begin to persecute the Christians. Stephen, he gets stoned to death. Herod arrests James, or kills
James.
Throws Peter into prison. And the book of Acts tells us that many of the Christians, there was a great persecution and they began to flee. And I think it's that point that God says, okay, there's a desolation. There's no need to have a temple anymore. It served its purpose. In fact, we would even continue that tradition for a while as long as they would allow my people to preach Jesus. But now that they don't, we might as well bring it all to an end. So that's strange that you would say that, because that was exactly my thought too. I don't think it's any one historical event, but it probably is just this rejection of the gospel that was come to God, brought to his people first. First people he went and came and said, I wanted to save you. How often I would have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. All right, so we hope that helps you. Any other comments?
So that temple destroyed then in 70 AD and it's still not rebuilt today. I mean, that's pretty remarkable 2,000 years later. Yes.
Yeah. So let's move on to Matthew 25. So we got more stuff about the end of the world. What's going on in Matthew 25 about the end of the world?
Well, this one is a little more familiar. I think abomination, desolation stuff, pigs and Zeus statues. We're not all that familiar with that, but we know Matthew 25, and it's I think part of the reason why it's been so depicted by artists and even literature in all sorts of different ways. And so I think of there's this old mosaic from the 6th century that depicts Jesus with two angels, and then on either side, literal sheep and goats.
Is that right?
Animals on his sheep on his right, goats on the left. I'm glad you asked. Yeah. It's pretty easy to tell sheep and goats apart. So I mean, if you've been out on the farm, I'm in the big city now, but if you've been on the farm, so you have the goats, they have hair, the sheep have wool. Right? The goats, they have a tail that usually is up, sheep have tails that are
No,
down.
Wait a second. I want to write this stuff down. So now I'm not only going to impress people with my knowledge of the abomination of desolation, but I can show them with my animal husbandry.
That's right. Very good.
So goats tails up,
Sheep are down.
tail down. Goats just hairy, sheep with wool.
With wool.
obviously.
Goats
Okay.
are a little thinner. Sheep might be a little more plump,
Plumper?
if you think
Okay.
about that. Which I think is important to keep in mind because when it comes to real sheep and real goats, well, you could tell them apart. Of course,
Yeah.
anyone could tell them apart. Even some guy that lives in the city like me can tell them apart. But what's the deal when it's people? What is it that determines whether someone is a sheep
Oh,
or
let
a
me
goat?
see. Since we don't have tails, that's out.
So the more plump ones are the no. That's
Some
not
of us
it.
don't have as much hair as others have hair.
Let's not name
That's
names.
probably not going to work.
So what is it? And
Yeah.
that's really the question. So anyway, that piece of art, I think it's kind of interesting. It has literal sheep on his right, goats on the left. But then you have these, and Jesus pictures a king, and he's looking out at us and kind of looking at the viewer, almost asking us, which side
Where
are you
gonna
on?
be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you've ever been there to the Sistine Chapel. I haven't been fortunate enough to
I haven't
visit it.
either. I
But
haven't
that
either.
beautiful
I've seen pictures.
altar piece, not on the ceiling, but by the altar. Michelangelo, of course, paints that, and it's the sheep and the goats.
Is that right? I
Only
didn't know
this
that.
time it's not people. It's not sheep, real literal sheep and goats. It's people.
It is people.
And in the middle is this muscular figure, and it's guess who? Jesus. Returning as king to rule and to reign.
Are there visible things that distinguish the people in the picture?
It's this sort of this swirl of activity. I mean, it took them 4 years to paint this thing.
Yeah.
And it's not. There's other pieces where it's suffering and
Yeah.
paradise.
Oh, yes,
and
definitely.
not as much in
Is
this
that
one.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, because
yeah.
we're not.
It's kind of chaotic. When I look at it.
The suffering and that's usually after when they depart from me or, come
Sure.
with me. Yeah. But we're still in the judgment.
So my whole point in saying this is I think it's something we're familiar with, sheep and goats, and we even use that term somewhat in cliches even today. But I think it's really a misunderstood story, though, that Jesus tells.
Are
It's
you gonna
familiar
help
but
us?
misunderstood. So
Are you
let's
going to help us understand?
Well, we'll sure try.
Have you ever seen the Sistine floor, by the way? I hear that's really impressive, too.
Yeah, I think there's a Far Side cartoon about that. Was it someone in Lombardi and Sons installing the Sistine floor? Yeah, it's we're not quite as famous, but
yeah.
I know.
Oh, where were we at? Matthew 25.
Matthew 25.
You want me to start reading there, Matt?
Yeah, let's just kind of walk
Okay.
through this a little. I think that's probably the best way to handle it. So, yeah, let's do verses 31 through 33.
When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him he will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from the other, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. You want me to keep reading?
Well, okay, so that's verse 33.
Yeah.
I guess we'll pause there and just say, okay, sheep on the right, goats on the left. But again, what determines that? What
That's a good
determines whether
question.
someone's a sheep or a goat? How do I know whether I'm a sheep or a goat?
Yeah.
And I think verse 34, the next verse, gives us insight. I think
Okay.
Jesus himself gives us some insight.
Then the king will say to those on the right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world."
Yeah. So the ones on the right, the sheep, come, blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So what determines a sheep isn't whether they have wool or hair or tails up or down, or even the good things that a person does.
Well, now wait a second, because then he's going to go on and he's going to list all the good things these people
what
do.
very good. But what I think is interesting, before he even does that, he says this. This is kind of the sets the stage, prefaces the whole thing.
And by the way,
these words in
they're
verse
already
34.
divided up, aren't they? There's
Yeah,
already been a
it's already been
separation.
done.
Yeah.
So before we even talking about feeding the hungry or clothing the naked, Jesus already tells us who the sheep are.
In fact, actually, the judgment is done, gone, and over with, isn't it? Yeah.
I think that's what's interesting too. Is this is happening publicly though.
Right.
And there's
Before
this
all are gathered.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to recognize. The judgment, that's done, right? And for those who have died in Christ before this time, they're already with the Lord. Now their bodies are raised. This idea of the last day. Okay, that's all done. But this is now publicly taking place, this separating.
Let me ask you a question here.
Sure.
And by the way, don't get worried about the time. We're going to go ahead and do this next week, too.
Okay.
All right. For those of you that think we planned this out all ahead, We're giving the truth. And we just kind of do it as the Spirit leads us. Because, we have these people gathered. And it says he will gather all the nations. So what is your opinion? Because I've heard two ways of understanding this, that it literally is everyone. Okay? It's everybody in the world gathered here. But I've also heard it said that, no, this is just the believers. All right, well, those who claim to be believers. This is just the church that is gathered. And the argument for that is the commandment was go and make disciples of all nations.
Yes.
And now we have all nations gathered. So it would be those who claimed, at least, to be part of the church. You got an opinion one way or the other about that?
Well, if this is Christ's return, certainly at his return, I would just, go to the creed, too, that we believe in the resurrection of the body, the life everlasting. So certainly when Christ returns, regardless of what this individual story is talking about, all are going to be raised. We want to make that clear.
Okay, yeah. So
believers, unbelievers.
Yeah.
We want to make that clear. This particular account, well, I guess you could go either way, perhaps. But if it is those who have heard the gospel, certainly the goats are those who are numbered among those who have rejected it, those who are perhaps even hypocrites within the church. So we want to be clear on that too. So as we move on in the account, I think it becomes more and more clear that it's those who have faith and those who don't, those who reject Christ, the King who's returned.
And I'd always just assumed the one that said all nations that it did mean everybody.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's some more to be thinking of it in terms of we don't need to worry about the other because they have not believed, they have not accepted. So it's not really an issue for them in terms of a final judgment. But it really does become an issue for those who said that they were believers, that heard the gospel.
Yes.
But of course, like you said, there are hypocrites. That's been a fundamental teaching. That there always are hypocrites in the church, and yet it's still the church. That's the great thing. The hypocrites don't nullify the church, but that there would be hypocrites as well. Anyway, I'd heard it both ways. I just wondered if you had an opinion.
Well, I think the important thing to again is when Christ returns, it's going to be all people who are raised, of all
that's right. We're not
nations, everywhere.
That. Yeah.
But what we're wrestling with is, okay, what about this particular chapter in this story? Yeah.
Okay. So, but do you want to delete? Because I think it's kind of cool that, like you said, these are obviously the believers that are spoken of here because they are blessed. They've got an inheritance, right? Which you get when somebody
gives it to you when someone dies, and then it's just given.
Yeah, so it's not, your Uncle Charlie could leave you $10,000 and maybe you didn't even know who your Uncle Charlie is, but he died and because of his death and so that's, of course, as Christians, then the bell goes on and the light lights up for some of us anyway, whose bells and lights still work. It's Jesus, right? He died. We got an inheritance, right? And it's just given to us. I always like the part about prepared before the foundation.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's just mind-blowing. That's just before the foundation of the world, he's chosen us by his grace. Nothing that we've done to earn that choosing, but just purely the grace of God, made righteous by grace in Jesus.
So having established that it's about faith. It's obviously about faith. These are all faith words about inheritance and blessing and all of that. So then why... I'll read the next part and you tell me why does he want to bring all this stuff up? And maybe we'll have people come back and listen. They will. They'll have to come back and listen next week, won't they, Matt? Because we're out of time.
We are. And I would like to begin with a little analogy about the pardoning of the Thanksgiving Day turkeys by the president and how that applies to Matthew 25, maybe.
Oh, man. So we have exciting stuff.
So come on back and hear a little bit about a wishbone and drumstick next week.
All right. So the wishbone and drumstick, and then why would Jesus bother mentioning works when obviously it's about people, their faith? Well, we got a great start to the new church here next week on
Wrestling with the Basics.